It's finally here. The 80HE is the highly anticipated successor to the Wooting 60HE, a keyboard that changed tactical FPS forever.
I'm on the Wooting right now. I just switched.
The 80HE is bigger and comes with a few additional features, such as a light bar, 8K polling rate, tighter switches, and a nicer sound signature. But is all of that really worth it? Let's find out. Okay, so the 80HE is the 80% sized follow-up to Wooting's celebrated 60HE that was released last year. Now, it wasn't Wooting's first board, but it was the one that started a revolution, thanks almost entirely to its switches. Wooting's Hall effect switches are magnetic, meaning that they can detect every instance of movement within a keystroke. Keyboards are notoriously difficult to innovate and iterate upon, but Wooting did just that. To this day, it is widely regarded as the best gaming keyboard on the market. It's just faster and more accurate than anything else. In fact, there's only ever been one problem with the 60HE. Its size. 60% layouts are not for everyone. You lose out on arrow keys, a delete key, and a top row of function keys. And so the fan base started begging Wooting for a larger form factor, which they got, only it wasn't great. Fans were disappointed with Wooting's first mock-up of the 80HE, mostly due to the placement of the arrow keys. Wooting listened and made changes that were more in line with their community's wishes. The question is whether that improved layout is worth the upgrade. Thankfully, we can offer some insight. Wooting sent us an 80HE for review purposes, and I have had the pleasure of testing it for about a week or so. And boy, do I have thoughts. You see, I never actually used a Wooting. Now, mind you, I've tried the 60HE since testing the 80, so I can offer insight on whether the upgrade is worth it, but there's still a sense in which I'm just coming in fresh. Out of the box, you get a dust cover, the keyboard, a braided USB-C cable with a regular USB-C adapter, as well as some extra screws, keycaps, and switches. You also get 3 different sizes of silicone risers to increase or decrease the typing angle. Now, for those of you who've never actually used a Wooting and you want to know whether these signature switches are actually worthy of all of the hype, I can assure you that they are nuts. For context, I tried out Razer's Huntsman V3 with SnapTap prior to it being banned in CS2, and I really didn't like it. The keyboard itself is light and sort of rattly, which makes the keys just sound loud and clangy and awful. But SnapTap itself was also just awkward? I genuinely don't know why everyone liked it so much. It felt cumbersome and weird. It went against over a decade of muscle memory for me. In fact, with no SOCD software at all, I infinitely preferred Ponage's ZenBlade 65, since it hits all of my sweet spots. It's smooth, super quiet, 65%, aluminum housed, and sounds and feels almost as good as my custom. So I honestly wasn't expecting to like the Wooting very much when I plugged it in. I don't like plasticky light chassis, I hate TKL, but I figured, you know what, let's see what all the hype is about. So I plugged it in, loaded up aimbots, and was floored. I don't know what kind of witchcraft or wizardry is going on with these magnetic switches, but they feel crispy. I can only speak to Counter-Strike since that's where I use them, but counter-strafing feels insane.
Sweet.
Now, those of you who've used the 60HE know this already. You're probably thinking, my keyboard does that. What does the new one offer that my current one doesn't? Wooting is selling this thing based on its form factor, the tighter, less wobbly switches in the form of the Lecker V2s, the light bar, and of course, the 8K polling rate. Do these things matter? And taken together, how do they allow the 80HE to stack up against the 60HE? Well, why ask me when you can just ask TENS?
Out of the box experience of the 80HE, it is probably the best custom keyboard that I felt out of the box. It's ridiculous for terms of performance and feel. I mean, it's basically what the 60HE is, but in 80% format, which I prefer more just because I like arrow keys for if I play other games. But yeah, I think it's probably the best in slot keyboard right now, just the Wooting series in general.
And for the most part, I agree. TENS did go on to say that the 8K polling rate is sort of unnoticeable, which is how I feel, but for an out-of-the-box pre-built keyboard, the look and feel of this thing is out of this world. Though still a tad wobbly, the Lecker V2s are definitely an upgrade over the original Leckers and blow other pre-built switches out of the water. I'm using the linear 60s and they feel very, very good. They're also hot swappable, so you can freely replace broken switches or add new ones. It's also gasket mounted, unlike the 60HE, which was tray mounted, making it sound way, way better. The light bar is cool, but I'll be honest, I haven't really found a use for it that isn't a novelty, like serving as a visual indicator for the analog key press. And then there's the matter of the size. Now, look, maybe this is controversial, but I infinitely prefer a 60% to a 75% or a TKL or an 80%. I find it very annoying that this board has this top row of function keys, and if it were up to me, I would have just made it a 65%. And while the ABS plastic case does look and feel amazing, I'd be lying if I said I wouldn't have preferred something metal, which, to be fair, Wooting does offer in the form of a zinc alloy case, which I would love to try. But a fully assembled 80HE with ABS is already just over $200 US. If you go the alloy route, it's just over 300, which for a pre-built is a lot. For context, the Zenblade is $199 US and has its own version of rapid trigger as well as Hall effect switches, all while being smaller, sturdier, and smoother. That said, I do think that the switches on the 80HE feel a tad more responsive. I really would have loved to try the alloy version since, in spite of the size, I do think that might have made the difference for me. After using a custom for so long, using a plastic board just feels wrong. But I will say, the Wooting is unquestionably the best feeling ABS board I've ever used. Now, in fairness, Wooting have said that they will release the files containing the 80HE's case specifications to the public later this year, which means other metal variants should become available. But for right now, it is really expensive. So, is the 80HE worth it? Well, if you don't own a Wooting, I would just go for the 80. It feels a lot better than the 60 with the new switches. If you do own a 60, I think it depends on three things. One, how much are you willing to spend? Two, do you really need the extra size? And three, how much do you love Wooting? By a lot of people's estimation, Wooting is still the best at what they do. And maybe they are. But they're not the only option anymore when it comes to Hall effect switches. They're also far from the cheapest. As Bryan over at Bad Seed Tech helpfully illustrated, while the ABS option is still fairly competitive price-wise, the alloy option is just out of this world expensive, which to me matters. I don't just use my keyboard for counter-strafing. I use it to type, and I want it to feel heavy and sturdy and smooth and great when it does that. So while I do really like the Wooting and will keep fiddling with it, it's not my dream keyboard. At least, not yet. But is all of that really worth it? Let's find out.
Can you give the Let's Find Out a little bit more, like,
Let's
show host?
find out.
Yeah.
Like a little more Bill Nye?
Yeah, exactly.
T minus 7 seconds.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.